They start pulling away, and you feel it before you can explain it. It's not something obvious at first, just a slight delay, a shift in tone, a change in energy that feels small but carries weight. And that's where everything begins to go wrong, not in their distance, but in your reaction to it. Because the moment you notice the shift, your mind starts searching for certainty. You want to understand what changed, why it changed, and how to bring things back to how they were. So without realizing it, your behavior starts changing too. You reply faster, you add more to your messages. You try to keep the interaction alive instead of letting it breathe. And from your side, it feels like effort. It feels like you're protecting the connection before it slips. But from their side, it feels like pressure building where there used to be space. And that difference is where attraction starts to fade, because attraction doesn't collapse the moment someone pulls away. It weakens when the dynamic becomes unbalanced. And that imbalance almost always comes from You think you're fixing something? But what you're actually doing is removing the very tension that made things feel natural. Tension isn't conflict. It's the space between interactions that creates curiosity. It's the reason someone thinks about you when you're not there. And when that space disappears, so does the emotional pull. Most people don't notice this happening. They only notice the silence, and they try to eliminate it as quickly as possible. So they send another message, then another, then something longer, more expressive, more revealing, hoping clarity will bring things back. But clarity doesn't always create attraction. In fact, too much clarity removes the need to invest. Because when everything is explained, there's nothing left to figure out. And when there's nothing left to figure out, there's no reason to lean in. So what feels like connection on your side starts feeling like expectation on theirs. And expectation creates resistance. Not immediately, not consciously, but gradually, emotionally. They start replying a little less. They take longer. They feel less urgency to engage. And now you feel that shift, so you respond again. You try to bring things back to normal. But normal isn't something you can force. And every attempt to force it pushes it further away. This is the cycle most people get stuck in. They pull away, you move closer, they pull further, you try harder. Until eventually it feels like something just collapsed. Like interest disappeared overnight. But it didn't. It changed gradually, and the reactions to that change accelerated the outcome. That's the part most people never see. They focus on the moment things ended instead of the pattern that led there. Because when you're inside the pattern, everything you do feels justified. Every message makes sense. Every reaction feels reasonable. But stacked together, they create pressure, and pressure changes perception faster than anything else. Because once someone starts feeling pressure, distance feels like relief, and people naturally move toward what feels like relief. So they create more space, not because they planned to, but because it feels easier than staying in something that feels heavy. And now you're reacting to a situation that your own reactions helped create. That's why this pattern is so difficult to break. Because it feels like you're responding to them, when in reality, you're responding to the dynamic you're shaping together. So the real shift isn't about doing more. It's about understanding when to stop. Not stop caring, not stop engaging, but stop reacting automatically to every shift. Because not every shift means something is wrong. Sometimes people pull away briefly to focus on something else, to reset, to rebalance. And when that happens, the worst thing you can do is make that moment about your need for reassurance. Because then it stops being temporary and starts becoming something they have to manage. And no one wants to manage someone else's emotional state early on. That's what pushes them further away. So instead of reacting, you stay consistent. Not distant, not cold, just consistent. You don't increase your effort to compensate. You don't decrease it to play games. You stay aligned with how you were, because consistency signals stability, and stability is what keeps attraction grounded. When someone pulls away and you remain steady, you create contrast. They expect reaction. They expect you to chase clarity, and when it doesn't come, it interrupts their expectation. That interruption creates curiosity, because now the dynamic hasn't flipped. You haven't become more invested than they are. You've stayed in the same position, and that position is what they were initially drawn to. So instead of feeling pressure, they start feeling space again. And in that space, interest can rebuild naturally, not because you forced it, but because you didn't disrupt it further. This is where emotional control becomes powerful. Not in suppressing how you feel, but in choosing how you respond, because your first instinct will be to close the gap. But attraction doesn't grow in certainty. It grows in the space between knowing and wondering. That subtle tension where someone is still figuring you out, The moment you remove that, you remove the pull. So when distance appears, you don't rush to eliminate it. You allow it to exist without attaching urgency to it. And that's what keeps the dynamic intact. Because urgency signals imbalance. It tells the other person that something has changed. And once they feel that they respond to the feeling, not the situation, that's why reacting too quickly often makes things worse. You bring attention to something that might have resolved itself naturally, and by trying to fix it, you turn it into something real. So the shift is simple, but not easy. You stop trying to control the interaction. You stop trying to manage their perception. You stop trying to secure the outcome immediately. And instead, you focus on maintaining your position. Because your position is what created attraction in the first place. Not your effort, not your explanations, but the way you carried yourself within the interaction. The moment that changes, everything else follows. So when someone pulls away, don't see it as something you need to fix. See it as a moment that tests whether you stay grounded or become reactive. Because that moment determines everything that comes after. If you react, you enter the cycle. If you stay steady, you break it. And breaking the cycle is what creates a different outcome, not instantly, but gradually, as the dynamic stabilizes instead of collapsing. And even if it doesn't come back, you haven't lost anything real. You've simply allowed reality to show itself without interference, which is far more valuable than forcing something to continue, because forced connections don't last. They only delay what was already happening. Real attraction doesn't need constant maintenance. It needs space to exist. And the moment you understand that, you stop reacting to every shift like it's a threat. You start seeing it as information. Information about interest, about investment, about where you actually stand. And when you see it that way, you stop chasing clarity. You let behavior speak, because behavior is always more honest than words. Someone can say they're busy, but consistent distance tells a different story. Someone can say they're interested, but lack of effort reveals the truth. And once you start paying attention to behavior, instead of explanations, everything becomes clearer without you needing to ask. That's where your power comes from. Not from controlling the interaction, but from understanding it without needing to interfere. Because the more you interfere, the less clearly you see what's actually happening. You blur the signal with your own reactions. And then you're not responding to reality anymore, you're responding to a version of it that your behavior helped create. So the goal isn't to make someone stay, it's to allow their actions to reveal whether they were going to stay anyway. And that only happens when you stop forcing the outcome. Because forcing always creates distortion. It keeps things going longer than they should, but in a way that feels weaker, less natural, less real. And eventually, it collapses anyway. So when you stop forcing, you get clarity faster. And clarity is more valuable than temporary comfort. Because comfort can keep you stuck in something that isn't actually working. While clarity moves you forward, even if it's not the outcome you hoped for. And that's the real shift most people avoid. They don't want clarity, they want reassurance. They want to feel like things are okay, even when the dynamic is already changing. So they chase that feeling. They try to bring back certainty. But certainty, when forced, isn't real. It's just temporary relief. And once it fades, they're back in the same position, only now with more investment and less clarity. That's why letting go of control is so powerful. Because it removes the illusion. It shows you what's actually there. Without distortion. And from there, you can make decisions based on reality, not hope, not fear, not overanalysis. Just reality. And when you operate from that place, you stop reacting emotionally to every small shift. You become steady, grounded, unmoved by temporary changes. And that steadiness is what keeps attraction alive. Because it signals something most people don't have. Emotional self-control. And that's what people are drawn to, even if they don't consciously realize it. Because it feels different. It feels calm, it feels secure, and people naturally gravitate toward that feeling. So the next time someone pulls away, don't rush to fix it. Don't rush to understand it. Don't rush to close the gap. Stay where you are, stay consistent, stay grounded. And let their behavior reveal everything you need to know. Because the moment you stop chasing the outcome is the moment the outcome finally becomes clear.